Welcome to the HR Resource Podcast, a series designed specifically for business owners and executives who want to better understand people to increase productivity and performance. When was the last time you can remember going down your local high street for a little bit of retail therapy, a bit of shopping? Was that yesterday? Last week? A couple of weeks ago? Or maybe longer? For most of us, the pandemic has created new habits and lifestyles that perhaps have excluded certain trips and leisure experiences. And an uptick in online activity has meant that actually we've been happier buying stuff over the internet. Little brown boxes keep appearing at the door, and we find ourselves not really having the call to go down our high street. So, what is its future? Where does it lie? All those big names that we used to see regularly in the high street, we used to find ourselves looking at any particular location in the UK, and we could have been anywhere in the UK because all the brands were familiar and the same. But a lot of them have now gone. Businesses that are remaining and trying to fight are smaller, independent, creative, and dynamic. But are they going to make the difference? Are they going to be our high street? Well, today I'm going to be talking to an expert in that field. Graham Soult is a high street champion. He's a retail consulting expert and, helpfully, a digital marketing expert too. We're going to take a journey with Graham from his early days when he learnt about his retail experiences through building with Lego and playing with the idea of building a high street, through to some examples of how our high streets have evolved over time, in bygone times, through to current day, and then project forward. So we talk about all sorts of things apart from Lego. We talk about Dalek selfies. We talk about the experiences that we're finding with marketplaces that are adapting and putting themselves clearly in competition with some huge American corporations and succeeding. And we look at the way in which owners, business owners and retailers believe. And when they believe and they dream, they can make things happen. And so it doesn't matter where you are and how large your organization, you can make a difference and you can fight back. So join me in this conversation with Graham Soult, renowned retail expert who has worked with the BBC. He's been on The One Show, he's been in The Guardian, he's been in Forbes, he's been in Retail Week, and a regular contributor around the country and further afield internationally on this topic that is very topical, the future of our high street. I am delighted to welcome to the HR Resource Podcast an individual who is a retail consultant and champion of the high street. It's Graham Soult. Welcome, Graham.
Hi there.
Today, unsurprisingly, given your background, we're going to be talking about all things retail and the high street and the changing face of the high street, a very topical subject. But obviously, there's a lot that goes into getting to a point where you become somebody that's termed as being a champion of a high street. And I'm sure our audience would love to know a little bit of the journey of how Graham came to that point of becoming somebody that is a go-to, because I know that you're regularly picked for interviews on the BBC and wide variety of networks. So how did life start for Graham? How did that spark? Were you building high streets in Lego? You know, how was that?
Oh, oddly, I was, and that wasn't even kind of fed to you. It's genuinely a thing I was doing. So as a child, I did used to kind of build kind of shops and town centres and things in Lego, and I loved doing that. I loved creating the places and making up the stories of what the people were doing in all these buildings. And seriously, it then prompted me to go off and do a degree in architecture and a master's in planning. So I had that kind of built environment experience, off the back of the Lego things in the early days. and then from there, things took a slightly in and out kind of journey, in that I didn't really want to be an architect. I decided, which was it was a bit late after starting a 6-year degree, but even so, but I think I was fascinated by places, but I wanted to play a part in shaping and understanding places that were already there, rather than necessarily kind of building my own.
Yeah.
And so it prompted all kinds of things. I went off and did um, academic research in the kind of built environment field and culture, and then I had a job in market research. But I'd always had this interest in retail and high streets and kind of retail places, and so I started a blog. I'd never worked in retail really, but I had this kind of passion and interest, and so I started a blog. I began tweeting, and really it's through building that kind of profile online that, you know, over the last decade or so, I was able to start making, you know, inroads into the kind of high street space, if you like, and being seen more and more as an expert in that. And so now I do my consultancy, and it's lovely to be able to be out there, you know, working with real places, working with real businesses, and doing stuff that hopefully helps them, not just in Lego, but, you know, in the bricks and mortar world.
It's actually, I suppose, our relationship in some ways is a little bit of a demonstration of that, in as much as we are geographically quite close to each other. We're both based in the northeast of England. We've never actually physically met, but we've been connected digitally for what, 10 years? It must be nearly now.
Yeah, I would have thought so. I'm, you know, on Twitter and LinkedIn and so on, and again, it's the power of those tools, and I'm sure something I'll talk about later on is that you know, is that the power of these kind of online tools to spread the word about and to drive footfall to, you know, all the real world bricks and mortar stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, as you say, we will be touching on. So I've heard you've also described, I think it was one of the local papers, the Newcastle Journal, as being the cross between Mary Portas and Stephen Fry. I get the Mary Portas bit. I think I get the intellectual part about Stephen Fry. Just expand on that for me. Where did that come from?
I'm not quite sure kind of where they got it from, actually. It was, I think it was an article where they were talking about the Northeast Twitterati, and that's how they kind of.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
But I suppose it's because obviously Mary Portas is obvious because of the kind of retail and high street stuff. I guess Stephen Fry because he's a bit irreverent, he's a bit cheeky, and never takes himself too seriously, I think, and that's something I've always tried to communicate, you know, in the stuff that I do online too, because I think to build a profile in any field, you have to be a nice person fundamentally, and I like to think that in the stuff that I do online, I talk and I listen and I communicate, and I'm hopefully a good person to engage with.
I can testify to that, absolutely. And on that point about being online, something also I'd like to be able to offer the audience is to have a fairly early opportunity to make a note about, oh, this is an interesting chat. How would I find out about you? So what are the connecting points for finding you, Graham?
Yeah, well, I'm quite Googleable. I've got a good name for Google.
Googleable.
Yes, I'm. There aren't many Soults in the country, so if you just Google Graham Soult, that's Graham with an H, and then Soult, S for Sierra, Oult. You'll find all my online stuff. But basically, if you find me on Twitter, I'm just on Twitter at Soult, Soult, and I'm on LinkedIn. And if you want to find out more about my work, let's go and find cannyinsights.com.
You must have been a fairly early adopter of Twitter to capture Soult.
I think it was 2009 when I joined Twitter. So I wasn't like kind of in the really early stages, but it was fairly early on. It was before it became really mainstream. And again, you know, it does help having a unusual name. I think English Heritage last week did a flag for the football where they listed the top 30,000 names in England, and Soult wasn't among them. Soult is a name that has fewer than 100 people in England with it. So
oh, wow.
it does help being a bit unusual. Obviously, I was born long before Google, but I'm glad that my parents' name wasn't Smith or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a relatively unusual name in law. There are a few of us dotted about, but I think one of the things that I did fairly early on was, when we were 3 children, was capture the real estate. So they've all got their own domains. Whether
Wow.
they use it or not, I think they just thought the dad was a bit of a weird geek. But there you go. They're there, and if they ever want to use them, then nobody else can take it away. So that was one thing. Talking about real estate on a digital sense, but also now on a physical sense, I think we will obviously get into the thing that we can't ignore, which is the lockdown situations of the pandemic. But really, the situation with the high street and its long talked about demise and change and evolution started some way back time. And actually, I watched doing my research, because I'm a good boy. I like to do my research. And I caught up with a video that is on your website. I'd encourage people to look at it, because it's based in Byker, another Northeast reference, but it follows a journey of a particular location in Byker, 63 Main Street, or something like it's number 63, is it?
Yeah, Shields Road.
Shields Road, that's
Yeah,
it, number 63.
yeah.
And it follows from what was the sort of turn of the century department store, the sort of haberdashery, clothes, everything they sold you, large family presence, probably the largest family presence outside of the city, Newcastle, in Shields. And it just follows a migration of the various different, I won't give you too many spoilers. I think people should look at that, because it really does tell a story, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Of a typical location on a high street.
it reminds us of how the high street has always been evolving, and somewhere like Byker Shields Road has evolved an awful lot over the years. As you say, it used to be a prime pitch outside of the city centre in Newcastle. It had 2 or 3 department stores of its own, and obviously it's very different now, but it still performs an important local function, even though it looks very different to how it did 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean everything from Woolies obviously plays a part, doesn't it, at some point, and then it's a YMCA, and then and then ultimately where we are right now, and everybody's thinking, well, it would be, wouldn't it? It's a Wetherspoons. So it's, that is the sort of high street. I said I wasn't going to give any spoilers away. I've just ruined it. But anyway, I do think it's absolutely. I think the guy, is it Deco Flair? The guy from Deco Flair is really,
Yeah.
really, really quite entertaining. I think that is something to tune. It's not very long, but it's about less than 10 minutes, isn't it? It's
about 4 minutes. Yeah, it took a good 2 hours of filming just for my bit, and they were filming all day in Byker to make a 4-minute report for the one show. So that's how it worked.
But it was really good, and the research must have gone into finding some of the workers as well, some of the people from the original sort of stores all the way through. I thought that was fascinating. So that really, we're aware that history, it's been changing, it's forever changing, but we've had a couple of we obviously went through bad times in the 70s with some recessions and power cuts and industrial action and governmental changes and pressures. But I think there was the recession of 2008. Was almost another catalyst point where we started to see some significant changes in the high street and downturn. And then we saw a response to that from the government to try and inject a little bit of life into the high street. And that was a program introduced by David Cameron, which he thought Mary Portas would be a very good person to be able to have a look and a review of the high street. What was your take on that at the time? Did you see that as being the right solution, or were you? I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but genuinely at the time, did you think, thank goodness for this, we're going to do something?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a poisoned chalice for Mary Portas, to be fair, because it was such a big ask. No one person could possibly ever save the high street, as it were. But I think her input, it was helpful. She produced a good report that can set out a lot of the issues that were affecting high streets, and gave some good ideas for kind of how to address those. I think on the ground it was more challenging, because one person being sent to all these different places, it's hard for them to make much of an impact. But I suppose it was it was useful in that it started to put high street issues, on the political agenda, and certainly it it then prompted the people like Bill Grimsey to come in with their own reports and their own insights, and then in turn we've seen quite a lot of kind of talk and action around the high street from the current government. Things like the High Streets Task Force uh, and the Towns Fund and all those kind of things that are, investing in towns. And I think it's certainly the case that compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago, high streets, town centres, what people want these places to be, what the future of them is in terms of their functions and their qualities, those issues are probably more on the agenda now than they have been for a long time, which is obviously welcome.
Yes, and that drive, I guess, to rethink the high street is it's a reaction to the sort of cause and effect of how much activity is happening online. Because obviously the advent of the internet and the ability to be able to purchase things online as opposed to going to the high street. I'll give an example. I found myself, I've almost felt like an alien traveling into a new world. I do love Stockton High Street and Silver Street and the side shops, Drake's Bookshop, Hooray. There's some fabulous local shops that I absolutely adore, but I hadn't been into the high street because of lockdown, and because of being careful and having a particular routine to keep yourself safe. Some of these habits I'd got out of. And I found myself in a bank with a check to pay into the bank. Yeah, a totally alien situation. I won't bore you with the story, but anyway, I've had this check to pay into the account, and I was walking to the high street. And I was just thinking how different it did feel. That the fact that there were so many of the big brands that are no longer here with us, and the real, I suppose, challenge now for someone like Stockton, who actually were one of the 12 selected to be part of the Porter's experiment and review. And they've got some major plans to be able to repurpose now the town centre. Is there, why I'm thinking about it, does this have to be very much a localized response that suits the community, or is there a solution, do you think, for the high streets that covers the UK? And bearing in mind, we are talking, of course, very much here about the UK, but I suspect this is an issue that affects the world, or certainly the developed world with access to the internet.
Yes, there's a few points there to try and pick up on. I suppose the point about the internet, of course, online shopping is having a big impact on on the function and the viability of more traditional retail centres. I always make the point that it's in somewhere like Stockton, I think kind of out of town retail is just as big an impact. Any of these towns that have a huge retail park on the edge of them, the pace of change, the pace of departure has probably been accelerated.
Yeah.
Arguably, all those names that have moved into out of town places in places like Stockton and Bishop Auckland and Durham, wherever else, how many of those names would have stayed in the centre anyway if the retail park hadn't been there? Probably not all that many, but certainly out of town retail has been another factor in many towns. And what you find somewhere like Stockton is, yes, you've got a really good independent offer, as you mentioned, often not on the kind of main high street, but way, in the arcades and the alleyways and Silver Street and so on. So I think independent retail in places like Stockton is probably as interesting and as rich as it has been for a long time. The problem, as you say, is all these big premises, on the main high street, where you've had departures of businesses like New Look and Debenhams and Marks and Spencers, and what on earth do you do with all those things? So I think you're right. I think the answer in every place is a bit different. You can't just apply the same treatment everywhere. And in Stockton, I think what the future of a place like that looks like is that you will still have a strong retail offer, but it will be different. It will be, I think, driven and headlined by the independents who are doing interesting, distinctive things that you can't get everywhere else. And then you'll also have a strong convenience offer, because these places, you still need your kind of Tesco Express or your Poundland or your Boys or whatever it is, all those stores that you pop into for your bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And then alongside you, Weatherspoons in your bars and your restaurants and that kind of thing. So I think what we're seeing all over the place is kind of independent retail, still having a crucial role to play, a bigger role than they've had in the past even. Still this kind of strong convenience retail offer in many places, but a bit less of the comparison shopping, all the kind of clothing and electronics and that kind of thing. And then to fill up the gaps, you kind of mix in a whole load of other uses. So you bring in more people, some more workspaces, more housing, more student accommodation, more even more university space or whatever. All these different functions are coming together these days, and creating more of a mixed use centre in many towns and cities, and that certainly seems to be the dominant agenda at the moment. How can we make our places more diverse, more mixed use, more sustainable? And that, I suppose, links then to your question about is it a UK issue or a general one worldwide? And I would say, well, actually, if you go to lots of places on the continent, many of those town and city centres haven't had that kind of retail homogenous feel in the way that our places have. If you go to Paris or Berlin or kind of any of the European towns and cities, often you have this kind of mix of uses, people living on the upper floors above the shops and restaurants and things, and so you haven't quite got that same sense of places being devoid of life. If the retail departs, or indeed, as we've had in many places, devoid of life, after retail closes. As I've been to lots of towns and cities where it might be that the retail offer is very good in the daytime, but as soon as those shutters come down and you're there in the evening, it feels dead and empty.
Like a ghost town.
Yeah, ghost town, irrespective of whether those shops are going to open again in the morning or not.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of adopted, and I don't know, you're obviously the expert here, it feels like an American model in the sort of the big out of town sort of expansive malls, if you like, or malls, how you pronounce that. And you've got the big brands, a lot of the American brands that have come over as well, but international brands sort of taking a presence. And that in itself you could have been, arguments that are put forward, you could be anywhere in the UK and look around and you think, well, I could be anywhere in the UK because they all look very similar. I know you've travelled extensively around the country to look at different town centres, which is why I made the point about localized solutions. And I think that's got to be right, hasn't it? Because every town, every city has a personality, has a history, and has its own community outlook. So if you can tap into that and find a way in which that translates to its brand, then I think you might have something. And it's sort of fighting back against and I know there are examples of towns that have battered away, and no disrespect to any of the brands I'm going to mention now, but some of the big coffee brands like Costa or Starbucks, or because they want to protect their retail presence in the local community, and they don't want to see the loss of income from those individuals because it's being sucked away to another entity. So did you see that as I've always thought that when I'm sort of driving, I see the big sort of the golden arches from McDonald's, or I feel like we've become one of those sort of like a 50-second state.
Yeah, well, it was certainly the case that even until probably a decade ago, the success of a town or city centre was measured in some ways by how many of the big name stores it had, and so it, every place was trying to kind of win a Debenhams
Yeah.
um, you know, or to get those kind of big name investments, and it was only a decade ago that you had the new part of Eldon Square open in Newcastle. It was 2010, I think, and you had Debenhams and all the Arcadia brands, and and it was seen as a great thing for the city. But all that seems like a different world now, doesn't it? And I think I think it's good that in a way we've moved away from all that kind of clone town thing. And that was kind of really, I would say, the agenda in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s was certainly for places to get more and more the same and more boring in a way. And what if there's one silver lining of this kind of uptick in the pace of the evolution on the high street, it's that our towns and cities are becoming more interesting.
Yeah.
As you all know, I do lots of work in Durham. I work there on behalf of the parish council to work with independent retailers and businesses on a project called Indie Durham City.
Yeah.
And what's been lovely about Durham is that although it had quite a lot of big name departures last year during the pandemic, what's been nice since is the kind of extent of independence opening in the city. Some really interesting restaurant and hospitality concepts, but also some really nice actual kind of shops as well. A fantastic independent gift shop that's called Elbert and Bailey that stocks handmade gifts from makers across County Durham. Over the road from there, a shop called Discovering Durham, which again is a similar concept, but it's all kind of food and drink and gift items, all from within, I think, a 20-mile radius of the shop. And I love that kind of thing, and we're seeing more and more of that. And it's shops that offer really interesting products, great service, a great story, and you go into those places and you are delighted because you tap into that whole kind of story. You are having an experience you can't get anywhere else, and you're going away with something really interesting. And you've done something in Durham that you can't just get anywhere else that you might go. And so I'm really pleased that we're seeing interesting, marketing savvy independents like those. Really kind of upping their game and doing well, it seems, which is fantastic.
I can get that model, and I think that's fantastic as an example of what you can do to sort of counteract the way in which certain real estate elements have been taken out, or certain brands have come out of a town and city centre, and how to sort of repurpose with a view to very much focusing on what this area is about. And I can see that working for Durham and obviously places like Edinburgh and York and Bath, and I can see that happening in Norwich. But what about areas that are perhaps not quite so cosmopolitan, or don't have a big university and a big draw for populations from outside of the area? What about areas where the disposable income is not so high for the residents, and it is, how do they find a way? I mean, that's a really tough question. I guess I'm putting you there. Solve the problem, Graham. But I was just thinking, there are these really good examples. I think Stockton is probably a good example. I don't want to keep coming back to that, but as a town where perhaps the average income from the residents, I think Panorama did a program a couple of years back where the area got slated for being the sort of the haves and the have-nots. There is an issue of low income in areas in across the country. With proliferations of food banks and charity shops and the like. But I guess there are seeds of hope in there are the sort of independent bookshops, there are the independent retailers who find a different way. I mentioned Hooray. For anybody who doesn't know Hooray, the guys that are running that shop are passionate about sci-fi, about all things to do with fantasy worlds and the like. And you can buy back catalogue comics, you can buy merchandise relating to things like Doctor Who, which is their big thing. You go in, there's a Dalek that greets you when you walk in. The guys themselves are dressed in the outfits. And when you buy an item from the shop, you'll get a bag which is actually hand drawn with a character from the sci-fi show. It could be Star Wars, it could be Doctor Who. It's fabulous. It's an experience. It's an experiential trip to go and get. And I think for me, that's a way of saying, look, you'll come back because you've had a good time, you've had an experience, and you can always tend to find something. I mean, I've been in there looking for gifts for people, quite often not necessarily finding the right thing, but I always feel drawn to, I want to support these guys, and I will find something that these people. And I think that's the relationship when you're wanting to support your local community.
And I've got a Dalek selfie anyway from Inhuray, so.
Oh, that's brilliant. We won't exterminate that one from you. I mean, I do love what the guys do, and I think that sort of imagination and passion is something we need to ignite, don't we, in the high street?
Yeah, and it's an important point that you make about kind of making the high street accessible and welcoming to everybody, because I think sometimes there can be a sense that the answer to the high street and to filling vacant units is to kind of put these kind of posh kind of indoor street food markets everywhere, and we've seen plenty of those, and many of them are very successful in the right places. But I like to make the point that you don't have to make the high street gentrified in order for it to still be really good. And what's nice about I mentioned Elverton Bailey there, the gift shop in Durham.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful shop in terms of the presentation, in terms of the welcome. It's fantastic, but it's not necessarily that expensive. If you've got a couple of pounds to spend, you can still go in there and find something really nice. And I think I do work in Chesley Street too, and Chesley Street is a town that is it's a beautiful town, but it probably is a bit more kind of ordinary than Durham. It's not somewhere they get the same kind of volume of tourists. It's more focused, I think, on serving the local catchment. And again, there, a business that I've been pleased to support in Chesley Street is called the Craft Fair Shop, and it's like a pop-up craft fair that opens throughout the week, and it gives people who are crafters or makers a chance to get their products on the high street. And again, it's very accessible. It's not snooty. It's very down to earth, warm, rooted in the community. And I think it shows that you can have stuff, on high streets, any high street, that is really good, really interesting, really enjoyable, but it doesn't have to be posh or exclusive. And certainly in my work with the High Streets Task Force, I've been going around different places, and some of the places that I've been doing my visits for that are these kind of everyday towns. Ellesmere Port, Longton in Stoke-on-Trent, Hartlepool, Swinton in Salford, and those are the kind of towns that don't tend to get a lot of coverage in the national press. No. But to the people who live in those places, those towns are really important. It's where they belong. It's where they're rooted. It's where they want to support their local businesses. And again, I think some of the solutions there are about capturing the essence of those places and trying to think, okay, how can we gently evolve this to maybe, bring in, more younger people, more people who are maybe living in the local area but don't see this as somewhere they want to go yet. And it certainly isn't about losing, all the authentic stuff that makes those places what they are. In Longton, I went into the market hall, and it's a fantastic traditional, old-fashioned market hall, full of colour, full of noise. And the trick with something like that, it's not about taking the people who are there currently out of it and making it all posh. As you lose so much, it's about working with what you've got and thinking, okay, how can we kind of keep the best of this, but gently grow it, gently evolve it, and make it a real success. And so I'm very passionate about making sure that we don't try and make everywhere the same, in terms of seeing kind of upmarketness, as the only way to make high streets viable, because
keeping it real, and I think
real.
You touched on a point there, which sparked thought in my head, of the generational divergence in terms of behaviours and what people do. I'm working at the moment with a community organisation in Durham, the Southwest Durham Community News, and there is obviously that's about digital news, digital publishing, and the opportunities that present themselves in that particular trade, and the evolution there with everybody consuming news online now as opposed to the paper. But there's a strong body of individuals that if their paper doesn't turn up on time, on day, they'll let you know. And that's a clear demographic schism between those that have been very much used to their newspaper and finding out what's going on in the very local community, as opposed to people who've been used to consuming information now online or through an app. And whilst that does exist, I don't necessarily, my personal view is I don't necessarily think that one is going to end its life completely as people pass on. I think there needs to be a thought about, actually, is that wrong, that way of consuming information? And can we reintroduce that, but do that in a clever way that actually engages people? But at the same time, still embrace the digital. I mean, it's a balancing act, I know. But I do find that as we make that assumption all too swiftly, that the youth of today, all the young people, or the sort of the Gen Z, the younger millennials and the Gen Zs it's all got to be digital if it's going to be successful. And we can throw away some of that stuff that we've been doing for years that might have a worth and a future. And this idea about the high street, bringing that back to the topic in hand, thinking about one of the things that has taken off like nothing else is side hustles for people who've got a job, but actually they've got a passion which is outside of that job, and quite often that's related to crafting, or something that is far more creative, and that offers them what you're talking about there with an example, is an opportunity to present their goods. They would never think of necessarily having a shop in their own right, but there's a collective and a community that can offer them an opportunity to showcase their wares and what they do, which is great. And that's something I think where the younger generation can find an outlet and bring them back into that experience.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to pick up there. Certainly, that idea of kind of opening the high street up, having it as a place where you can grow ideas and grow businesses, I think is really important. All the businesses I've mentioned before are kind of focused on that idea of giving businesses or kind of people who maybe haven't had a toehold on the high street before a way to get out there and reach new customers and to validate what they're doing. And even something like Drake, the bookshop you mentioned, it started off in the Enterprise Arcade in Stockton. So it began as a kind of small business in this kind of retail hatchery almost. And that then grew into the business it is today in its own premises. So I think I'm certainly a big fan of kind of anything like that gives businesses a chance to start off on the high street and to see how it goes.
I'm not surprised with Richard, by the way, because talk about dare to dream. I mean, this is the guy, the authors that he's had through his doors. And I think it was a year or so ago, 18 months ago, he had of Greg James, who'd co-written a children's book, was sitting in the store. I popped in to sort of say hello, but it was that for me is you've got to dare to dream about that sort of thing. You've got to think, well, actually, we may be in this small sort of northeastern town, but people will come. You know, if we invite them, if we engage them, if we do something, and that really helps to put them on the map.
Yeah, and again,
the energy the guy's got.
yeah, and he's very likable. He's very authentic. He's a bit cheeky. You know, all the good qualities, and certainly again, Drake is very switched on when it comes to all the digital stuff as well. Trading online, very active on social media, and and the joy of Twitter and all these things is that you can reach people who in the olden days you would only dream of being able to talk to, and sometimes those opportunities can turn into really exciting things. So I think I'm a big champion, as you know, of the power of using Twitter to build these networks. It's not just about who you're talking to. It's about building all these relationships and then leveraging that sometimes to get these events in store and things.
Tremendous. I mean, a lot of this, we're all talking about the energy and inspiration and creativity coming from within and individuals taking that step. Do you think there's a need beyond what is already currently being put forward by the government to boost that? I mean, I know that there have been pots of money made available to certain towns, and it's been sort of spread out now a little bit wider. Do you have any concerns about how that money might be spent, or do you think there needs to be more of the same?
Yes, it's a good question. I think, of course, it's welcome that places are benefiting from capital investment from things like that the Towns Fund and the Future High Streets Fund. So those pots of money are basically focused on kind of bricks and mortar projects effectively, and investments in places that will help to make those towns more future-proof. So I grew up in Tamworth, for example, and Tamworth is a town that has got money from the Future High Streets Fund. I think one of the biggest awards actually, and that is being used. It's being used in part to improve the appearance of certain areas of the town, and to turn the old co-op department store into a site for the college. So all that kind of thing is good. The work of the High Streets Task Force is really valuable too. I mentioned that earlier, and the High Streets Task Force, that again is government funded. It's not so much it's not about spending money on big projects. It's more about sending people like me into these places to help build those networks, really, those local networks, and to build capacity. Because sometimes you might have a whole group of really passionate, skilled people in a town, but they don't necessarily all talk to each other, and they don't necessarily have the skills or the capacity or the time to do all the things they want to do in terms of thinking about a vision for their place, and what the future of their town looks like. So the High Streets Task Force is very much about kind of giving places that support. And I think it's great to be involved in that, and to be hopefully making a small difference in certain locations. I suppose all that stuff that the government is doing in terms of investing in high streets is very welcome, particularly if it impacts on northern high streets. So the northeast has done quite well out of it so far, which is always welcome. But I suppose all these things are a bit restricted in what they can achieve, as long as you've still got that kind of elephant in the room of business rates. And business rates, I know from my work on the ground, it's still probably the single biggest barrier to getting high streets where they need to be. Plenty of people want to open businesses on the high street. Plenty of people want to keep their businesses there. landlords are in many cases being quite flexible and offering good deals and flexible deals and
Yeah.
the kind of deals that are needed. But the one thing that you can't control is business rates. And so I think I've lost track of how many times the government has promised to reform or to consult or whatever else. I think there's currently something ongoing. I lose count really, but I think ultimately what you almost need to do is not to tweak the business rates and just impose some kind of online tax. You almost need to take a step back and think, okay, if we were creating a fair and logical system for retail, as it is today, across online and offline, what would that look like? And
Yeah.
I would love it if some new system could be thought of that is fair and sensible, and almost gets rid of business rates entirely, because I don't think keeping business rates but then kind of clobbering online with a different set of taxes is the right approach. You need a holistic, joined up way of looking at the retail landscape, I think.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And you've said a lot there, which I'm going to address, but I think there was one thing you said earlier about making a little difference in the work you do. I'm sure, Graham, you're making a huge difference in the work that you do. I've seen the outputs of your work and your consultancy, and there needs to be more of that. So I think, if we can't clone you, there's going to need to be another way to be able to sort of maximize what you can do. But listening to people like you who understand what's happening on the high street and understand the retail environment, I think is really important. And also what you're talking about with business rates, because of course you've not only got the online situation, but you've got the out of town big supermarkets that are effectively warehouses. So they're attracting rates at a different level to those that you might have to face if you're in the high street. That again, and they've got economies of scale, so they can stock up quite nicely and provide a competition. And they're also playing into all that convenience thing of the population driving around in their cars and getting somewhere. And all of that needs to be taken into consideration, I think, because of the environmental impact. So if we need to go somewhere, then we need to get into a car. And what about people actually living in the town centres? Because we've got a housing shortage. And the number of times you can walk down a high street and look at the shops, but then just glance up above those shops and see empty shells of what are probably very, very attractive, potentially, properties to be repurposed. I mean, hundreds of thousands of homes under the hammer right there, just opportunities that need to be made viable to bring it. And as a point you made about bringing people back into the high street, making them alive, not just during the day, but at night times as well.
But I think what's interesting is that although we've always had this thing of living over the shop, it's something that's been happening, say, in London and Newcastle for a good few decades, but it's starting to become a lot more mainstream, because I think landlords are looking at the buildings they own and thinking, actually, this property is never going to be let again for retail across all these multiple floors. So I've got no option but to think about how I keep the ground floor for retail probably, but repurpose the rest of it. And certainly in Durham at the moment, you've got a lovely old historic Burton building. It hasn't been Burton for a long time. It was Cotswold most recently, but that is having the upper floors turned into, I think, student flats.
Okay.
And the ground floor is going to be kind of relet as retail. So it's good because I think it's pointless having all this vacant space on the upper floors. So if you can turn that into a productive use, often it will be housing, but it might be a hotel in some cases or kind of offices. If you can turn that space into a productive use, it not only makes better use of the resource that we've got, but it also creates extra footfall, extra activity, extra surveillance that makes that place more viable and more secure and more attractive all through the day and night.
One other point as well that we've sort of glossed around, I suppose, when we're talking about the tax and the rates and what have you. Lockdown life, and at the peak, I think, when I was, there's three of us in the house now, we had a brown box arriving every other day at some point, I think, with Amazon or whatever deliveries. That in itself, with the delivery timescales of which the logistical, I mean, I've had the advantage of actually I've been to Dunfermline and had a look at the operation of Amazon in Dunfermline. It is unbelievable. I know they've had a little bit of negative publicity recently about what they're doing with some of their goods that are just being chucked away, but trust me, take that negative in a pinch of salt. You look at the overall operation; it's phenomenal. Credit where it's due. The Bezos and the guys and what they're doing in Dunfermline is quite unbelievable from a logistical perspective, which enables this delivery timescale that we've now got used to of, order it online, it arrives next day or within 48 hours. And that's raised now a bar of expectation about what we expect from deliveries and from convenience. What can operators in the high street do? Have you seen any examples of how people have competed with that and actually matched it or bettered it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and in fact, I did a whole interview about that very topic. I think it was last year, as it was when kind of Amazon was entering Scandinavia for the first time, because it sounds crazy, but there are markets in which kind of Amazon doesn't really operate or hasn't operated, and so it was entering.
Surely not.
Yeah, so it was entering Sweden for the first time, and so I did a interview with a magazine called Capital, which it's kind of like the Norwegian version of The Economist.
Right. Yeah.
And we're talking about all the experience of Amazon launching in the UK, and particularly focusing on what businesses can do to counter the effect of Amazon. And I suppose part of it, I think we've covered a lot already, and it's about being all those things that Amazon isn't. So if you can be local and distinctive and sustainable, and all those kind of qualities we've talked about in terms of these local independent businesses, that gives you a kind of point of it gives you a point of difference and gives people a reason to go and visit you on the one hand. But equally, I think you're right. One of the reasons Amazon is successful is because it gives customers what they want, and it does it in a very efficient way. So it then raises the question of, okay, how can other businesses take the best of what Amazon does and apply that to their own businesses. And so one example I like is Durham Markets. Durham Markets has been around since 1800 and something. And during the lockdown, when they weren't even able to open at all, they started doing a local delivery service. And so it was such a success. You can still order online on the Durham Markets website, and the joy of it is that you can get a selection of products from a range of businesses in the market.
All right. Okay.
All delivered at once, and
so it's literally their marketplace. They've replicated their own.
Exactly. And so I think deliveries are twice a week, but if you order on a Friday, I think you can get it on Saturday or something like that. But it's really cool, and again, it taps into the kind of environmental things as well that you've talked about, where it's all low carbon delivery. So it's trying to combine some of the convenience of Amazon in terms of the online ordering and next day delivery if you order on the right day, with a more kind of environmental angle. So you haven't got all these vans going around. It's delivered on a kind of e-bike or an electric vehicle, and it's tapping into the whole shop local thing. So it's doing some of what Amazon does, but with a local and green twist. And I think that is a really kind of powerful example of the kind of things we're seeing all over.
Fabulous. Graham, we could probably carry on this conversation for another hour or so, which I know we probably have a great time. But I just think for now, what I would love you to be able to do is take me on a virtual walk down a high street in 2025. Let's just sort of put a little challenge to you. What might we expect to see given the trends, given what's happening currently at the moment? And let's say we've done away with this darn pandemic and it's not around anymore. So we've got to we don't necessarily have to go around covered up in masks and PPE, but we can freely move around. But what are we going to see when we sort of walk down that high street? What's the experience?
That's a good question, isn't it? I suppose it will vary a bit depending on the size of the place. So obviously, if you're a little market town that is already kind of mostly independent, it probably won't look all that different. If you're a big city like Newcastle that has always been a big destination and has always had some of the big names, I think it again might not look all that different. But if you're walking down Northumberland Street, you might find that you've got a bit more diversity of uses. Maybe you've got some more kind of housing in there on some of the upper floors. Maybe you got a hotel or a gym.
Yeah.
Kind of businesses that are more about the kind of face-to-face interaction, kind of beauty, community functions, that kind of thing. So yeah, it will look a bit different. I think also in terms of the public realm, we're going to see more and more places investing in that and making sure that town centres are places that people want to go. We've seen over the pandemic how some places have moved away from having centres and streets full of traffic and have reclaimed some of those streets for pedestrians and for outdoor seating and things. And those have generally been very popular. Some of them have now reverted back, unfortunately, but in many cases, I think streets have been permanently reclaimed and will always have a bit more pedestrian use. Certainly in Newcastle, I know some of the streets there are being kind of tamed in terms of the traffic and given back to pedestrians and cyclists and people who want to linger. And I definitely believe that if we want to get people off their laptops, off their smartphones, into these places, you have to make it worth their while. And part of that is about the offer and the experiences that you have in the businesses there, but it's also about creating places that are clean and green and safe and uplifting. And certainly COVID has given us that awareness, I think, of the importance of green space, of the importance of outdoor space more than ever. So if there's one good thing to come out of COVID, hopefully it's that our future high streets, our future town centres are going to be places where anyone can go, enjoy the space, enjoy the sun, enjoy the fresh air, and feel uplifted.
Yeah. So we're not going to see traffic jams. We're not going to be sucking in lots of fuel. There's going to be green spaces. There's going to be leisure activities. I mean, are there any particular sectors that you think might proliferate or sort of no longer be around so much due to the online presence or other factors?
I suppose we're always seeing evolution in terms of those different things. Certainly some of the types of business that we're already seeing a lot less of are things like betting shops and banks, unfortunately, and mobile phone shops. So a lot of these things that were still proliferating only a few years ago are starting to quite seriously diminish. But it's always evolved. If you look back at kind of at the old pictures of Biker Shields Road or whatever, or any street a century ago, it's full of all kinds of businesses that you look at and think, really, was there an umbrella shop or a place selling that? it's a different world. So I think yeah, evolution is part of the picture. It's probably evolving at a faster pace now than it has before, but I think ultimately places are very resilient. They are, all of us have a connection to the places around us, and they will keep evolving, they'll keep shifting and keep responding to what we need. And so I don't buy the whole death of the high street thing. I think it's the death of boring retail perhaps, but I'm confident that our high streets have a good future, as mixed use attractive places that give us a reason to get out there and be social and yeah, and to enjoy what's on our doorstep.
So to sum it up, Footfall is coming home, Graham. But actually, that's going to happen. I think for me, I've really enjoyed the chat. I'm sure the audience has taken a lot from the explanations and the insights that you provided today. I really would like to just remind everybody that if they want to find something about Graham Soult, you can find him at Soult, S-O-U-L-T, on Twitter. And as he said himself, he's very Googleable. Graham Soult, you'll find lots of content and information. Graham, I'm delighted that you've been able to spend this time with us. Have you got a tip that you might want to give retailers? This is really put you on the spot now. For retailers as they sort of look forward to the next 12 months, something that maybe want to give you a call and say, hey, pop in, Graham. I'd like to hear how I'm going to make this a real success in the next 12 months. But what if you would then give away? What takeaway would you have for retailers?
Well, I've been doing a series of webinars over the past year, and I suppose the topics that I'm being asked to talk about are probably the areas where I can share most tips. I think one of the things I often talk about is Google, and I certainly recommend that any bricks and mortar business really should claim their Google My Business listing.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. That is an excellent tip.
So I do a whole talk about that because I think it's so important because even if people are going out in the physical world, they still are quite likely to Google you beforehand. And
of course,
and the number of businesses that either kind of don't have their Google listing at all or it's out of date, it's surprisingly high. So I would certainly say always claim your listing, always keep it updated, add your pictures, add your video, whatever, because it's like your kind of shop window in effect. And linking to the real shop window, I also do a talk on retail curb appeal. And again, I think it's never been more important to kind of really kind of wow passers-by and to grab people and to be Instagrammable. So I think certainly make sure that your shop looks as good as it can do. It's not always about having a fancy window. It can be as simple as just making sure that all your signage and your frontage is clean and tidy. And again, it's surprising how many businesses don't put out the metaphorical red carpet, if you like, and don't present a welcoming or attractive appearance. So I certainly encourage all businesses to make sure that both their online Google curb and their bricks and mortar curb are as effective as they can be to get customers over that doormat into the shop,
and ideally matched, as if your online presence is like one thing and then your reality is something else, but both very well done. Two absolutely fantastic tips, and I couldn't agree more with both of them. They really are practical tips that hopefully people will grab. And I concur with you. The Google My Business element is something that so many people miss. I think there was just a tiny little final piece here, but there was a time when Google thought that it had to try and get into social media in a way that was much more like the others. So Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and Google Plus was around. It didn't really ever work. But what they missed was the fact that they're already there. They are a social engine. They've got the platform, and that's where the Google My Business is so valuable. So an excellent tip. Graham, thank you so much. Great amount of time you've given us, and I'm sure this is going to be a very popular listen for a lot of our audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.